I'm going to begin by asking everyone to get comfortable and leave all your thoughts, all of your burdens, whatever they may be, physical, emotional, and just start to pay attention to your breath so that you enter into relationship with yourself, the person you take yourself to be. The only way out is through. So we can't just ignore the character, the person that we've been identifying with and hope that that is the awakening process. It doesn't really work like that. We need to face the situation we seem to find ourselves in and take a fresh look. And that's what we're doing with the Course in Miracles, with Jesus, with the wisdom that is Jesus, the Holy Spirit. That's what we're doing together. And the more we relax, the more we tune into our own breath, the more we notice that we have a heartbeat and that is our signature drum, the more we tune into our rhythm, the more able we are to acknowledge what seems to be going on so that we can move through that smoke screen into the light. That's another way of talking about this prayer in chapter 3. Jesus, we request to recognize what we already are. We ask willingly to re-know what we already know, which is that we are beyond the body, we are immaterial, we are non-physical, incomprehensible to the brain that we think we're thinking with, and that can feel amusing. I can't comprehend what I actually am. And to be willing to relax into that. That inner knowing that seemingly does not know what it knows right now. So we're just doing the usual and tuning into the breath. And when we do that, the breath can start to come more slowly and more deeply. And you don't have to strain. You just can imagine that the breath is not just here in the lungs, but it can be anywhere. It can be in the solar plexus, in the belly. You can feel the breath expanding through the rib cage from side to side, and the breath front and back. And the breath can also go high and low through the feet and up through the crown of the head. You can allow yourself to be filled on the inhale like a balloon. And then you can deflate on the exhale like a balloon. And just for now, you don't even need to relate to yourself as a person or a human. You can just feel the sensation of inflating and deflating on the exhale. And if you breathe that way continuously, just for a little while, you might get a little lightheaded. And that's okay. You're seated or you're lying down. You can always interrupt that long, smooth breath and just get back to normal if anything feels scary. if you stay with it, there's a good chance that there'll be a flip where you feel yourself being breathed. And that's not a big deal. It feels lovely, and it's useful in establishing that the Holy Spirit is now in the driver's seat. We can think of the breath as the Holy Spirit. For those of us who have felt that the words, when Jesus says, I am with you always, you are never alone, and we have felt that that's not true. I feel very alone. The breath can actually be a kind of proof that we cannot be alone, because we're breathing involuntarily. And we cannot stop breathing. We could hold our breath till we pass out, and then we'll start breathing again. So that is the Holy Spirit bridge from sleeping to wakening, from having a bad dream to moving into a mental state where we're having what the Course calls a happy dream. And it can be very soothing just to listen to a voice. And it's perfectly okay if you just enjoy the rhythm or the sound of me talking without paying attention. I'm just convinced that it's more important to be sponging, to feel ourselves becoming porous in some way, and to just marinate in our willingness to recognize what we are. And to have what we are become our new normal. That even though we're still functioning in the dream, more and more we're aware that we're dreaming. And what used to seem totally implausible, that we could be anything other than the person, starts to take on a reality. And something in us is relieved and uplifted, inspired at recognizing itself. For me, this state often feels like dropping fear. It feels like fear has dropped away from me. So for a long time, it seemed to me like I was not experiencing inner peace, because I imagined inner peace to be some kind of lofty operatic state of la. But it turns out that for me, and I think for many of us, it's more a relief from whatever has been our form of tension, anxiety, depression. The brain either does fight, flight, or freeze. So if we're the kind who runs, we start to have a sensation of being able to remain in a situation that was impossible for us to stay in before. If we're a fighter, we start to feel a lack of aggression in situations that, in a split second, we'd be charged up and angry and volatile. If we tend to freeze, and you may have done all of these things, a big breakthrough moment for me was when I felt frozen in an interaction with my second husband. I was telling myself more than I was telling him, but I started relating to him. I feel frozen to the seat right now. I can't move. I feel like I can't speak to you because you'll yell at me. That was a risk on my part, just to speak the truth, but it was very different than how I had interacted with him before, because I am feisty. So he knew that I could fight back and stick up for myself, but sometimes I just felt frozen because it seemed dangerous to speak the truth to him. And because it was so different, the way I started describing my actual physical state, not just my emotional state, but I'm stuck to the chair. It feels like my legs won't move. Something in him softened. I had this happen with him a few times at very important moments in fights where I turned to the Holy Spirit within. And the human tendency, the ego tendency is to ask, what do I say right now? What do I do right now? Jesus very clearly instructed Helen and the rest of us, don't ask me what you should do or say with this person. Ask me how to change the conditions for you thinking you're in this predicament in the first place. Changing the conditions means not following ego guidance, which just keeps us engaged, make up to break up. The ego doesn't care how we remain engaged. It means switching teachers and requesting and allowing the Holy Spirit to reveal something that's been obscured. And that tends to be a gentle strength. So that can sound contradictory. How can strength be gentle? How can gentleness be strong? Actually, that is our natural state, is that we are powerful and we are kind. And in God mind, of course, there's nothing to resist or attack or defend against. If in the moment that we're triggered in our usual way, we can tune into our breath and use breathing just to alter the ego normal and make more contact with ourselves and have more presence of mind so that a choice becomes possible, our whole feeling tone changes. It's very subtle. It's real. And then we become more attuned to ourselves and able to pick up on nuances and use this new skill. Now, the email that I sent out about transfer of training, I've always liked this transfer of training phrase in A Course in Miracles. And I think Jesus also refers to it as light transfer. And Jesus says the same thing in many different ways throughout the Course. And transfer of training, the quote that I pulled was, "The dream of waking is easily transferred to its reality." So the dream of waking we bring to the Holy Spirit, which is what we did when we said, help us recognize what we already are, and say something conversational like, in reading A Course in Miracles, Jesus has explained to me that I'm actually dreaming. It's hard for me to believe, but I'm open to it. And that you are my go-to teacher. If I come to you, Holy Spirit, not fully believing in you, not knowing what you are, and being told that you're beyond my comprehension, that you will guide me. And yeah, I want that guidance. I'd like it right now. I'm catching myself right now, relying on habitual tactics that really don't serve me. And I'm open to something else. Capital S, capital E, something else. Holy Spirit. Yeah, that's about all I said. And this was the nice picture. Okay, so what's been going on? The ego has trained us that God is our enemy. And before we fell for the ego story, and we fell for it because we were interested in it, we weren't duped. We were interested in this idea that we could separate from God. Before we fell for it, we're in God mind, which is just a state beyond description, an ineffable state. There's no learning going on there. We just are being life. We're just aliving. And we could try and describe this aliveness, which alives itself, as radiant, beautiful beyond description, powerful, with no need to exercise power in the ways that we think of, loving, everlasting. If the words we use to describe God mind are life, love, and light, then there's no death, there's no darkness, and there's no hatred. There's no guilt. All of these things, sin, guilt, fear, we have taught ourselves as a defense to protect us from God because we're believing that God is a threat. All of this we've taught ourselves. All the complexities and complications of life, we have taught ourselves. Not as people, as a collective ego mind, as the Son of God, forgetting what it is, an extension of God mind, and believing that it has become autonomous unto itself, separate and apart from God mind. So A Course in Miracles clues us into this situation. And then it gives us a practice as to how we can interrupt our habitual following of our teacher, the ego, the I thought, that has been having us learn on the untrue. And Jesus says, if you've been able to learn all of this, don't tell me you can't learn my course. My course is simply revealing to you what you already are. And you know this. So take that in. And as a student of A Course in Miracles, who's really finds ourselves taken with the material in one way or another, a lot of that is slowing down. A major way that the ego gets over on us is with speed and rapidity. The other way is forgetfulness, sleep. These are just two basic ways that we don't know who and what we are. And that's why I keep coming back to breathing in one way or another. If we catch ourselves scared, angry, upset, ashamed, guilty, if we can catch ourselves and say, I want to do this differently, breathe, because that will bring us back to presence of mind, and then stay open to receive. And one way to stay open to receive, which is not always so easy. Sometimes it's smooth and we're there and there's like a settling and an opening and the breath comes more easily and we get a thought that's inspired. We see a license plate on the car in front of us. We hear a song on the radio. A friend says something to us. Many, many different ways that we receive a message. The funny thing is, the message is not really coming down to us and telling us how to act in the world. We are actually rising up to the message. So if you think of the ladder back to heaven, which is a metaphor or an analogy, or both, in the Course, the bottom rungs of the ladder, it seems to us that we're getting messages coming to us, and that's fine. That's fine. Anything that works. And little by little, we start to realize, oh, we're rising up and receiving as much God love, knowledge, wisdom as we can tolerate. And so it comes in symbols that are applicable to our personal life. That's kind of God love being squeezed down and condensed into form. Because right now we're relating to form, and Jesus is using what the ego made, the physical world, as our classroom, and our personal identity as our classroom. Otherwise, we'd be kidding ourselves. And one of the things I like best about the Course is that we're asked to be honest and sincere. And that means really taking a look at ourselves, and we can look at our judgments of others, our opinions, our idealization of others, or our scathing critiques of others, so that we can own the projection, not to criticize ourselves, to catch this is how the ego relates. This is what the ego calls relationship. And again, not to criticize ourselves, but to realize that our personal survival is of the utmost importance to us. And it is rare that we are completely selfless and unconditionally love another. That starts happening whenever we're connected with the Holy Spirit, because that is our natural state. And it's not a state of sacrifice. All that's being sacrificed is sin, guilt, and fear. So in my life, I've become more and more aware of how frightened I am, and more honest with myself about it. Instead of putting on a good front to the world and to myself, I'm just naming it now. Oh, I open my front door and I look both ways, because one time there was a snake sitting right in front of my front door. And I'm never going to forget that. And I'm always going to look now. You know, and my prayer to the Holy Spirit is often, help me know that my natural state is one of fearlessness. Not so I can be careless in the world. I just want to know my natural state, that I am actually fearless and free. See, that's a very motivating prayer for me. That's a state of mind. That will inform how I deal with the snake on my front porch. In my case, there's so many things that are scary. So I'm reluctant to take a bicycle ride in my neighborhood because I have encountered wild boar with their young crossing the street, bobcats, big dogs like pit bulls that the neighbors have carelessly not closed the gate or whatever. They're running around, all kinds of wildlife. And so instead of a false bravado, I've just been bringing it all to the Holy Spirit and just saying, I'm afraid of everything. I'm afraid to step outside my front door. The other day, I got my husband to take a bicycle ride with me. We rode all over the neighborhood, very beautiful, beautiful ride. I said to him, it's so nice having you by my side. Goats, by the way, I've been followed by goats that were trying to jump onto my bicycle. Anyway, we're almost home. We're on our street. We pass my neighbor's home, and two dogs come galloping out of his driveway, and they're rambunctious, happy dogs, but I'm not looking because they're not on a leash and nobody's with them. And I'm very intuitive, and I immediately grok that these dogs are Rottweilers. They're not poodles, you know? And I'm hoping it's one dog, but it seems like more. And I'm just looking at my husband and saying, they're happy dogs, right? And he's like, yes, he loves dogs. Animals love him. I feel confident that he will keep these dogs happy. But guess what? The dogs like me, they're not going to my husband. They're like right by me on my bike, and I'm bicycling home, and they come into the garage. They're not leaving us. So I get off the bike, and I'm pleased at how I maintained conversation with my husband, and I definitely turned to Holy Spirit, and my nervous system is not too amped up. I get in the house and I think about it. And this is what comes to me. Amy, all of these bicycle rides and walks that you've taken, all of these encounters with wildlife, has anything bad ever happened? Nothing. No problem. And look what the ego does. It says danger, 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 instead of relying on the Holy Spirit and saying, all is well, all is well. Things happen. Things happen, but so far, all is well. And I want to tune into the All Is Well channel. Not to be in denial about all of the risks and dangers in this world. Obviously, they're here. Just to feel informed, embodying love, to be an emissary of the Holy Spirit, to be a lighthouse beacon, for my presence to be soothing. That makes life worth living. To be a comforter, to be a translator of fear to love, to emanate something higher beyond personal identity, cultural identity, beyond planet Earth. To ground ourselves in this choice, to become so attuned to the choice that now we're tuned into love on a regular basis, and we catch fear much more quickly. And we have something to do with that fear. We bring it to the Holy Spirit, who we're cultivating relationship with, to purify all of the self-serving relationships we've had with everybody else, that we have told ourselves how much we love that pet, that person, that parent, that spouse, that child, that lover. But if we're really honest with ourselves, uncritically, we'll see that we just really want to get what we want from the other. And not only that, we keep changing what we want. So some things are consistent, but think about it. Maybe I want my lover to be more affectionate. And then let's say he is more affectionate, and now I feel smothered. I'm like, well, that's too much. And then he's like, well, how much? And I don't know. I don't know. You're going to have to back off a little. That's too far. Come a little close. You can't get it right, because that's the ego. Seek and do not find. Analyze, but do not look. So transfer of training is getting wise to how we have trained ourselves as a collective ego mind to not know what we really are. And that's, let's call, ego brainwashing. And then Jesus offers us A Course in Miracles. It's a mind training. It's a training in recognizing that we've taken ourselves to be physical beings in a physical world, and that's a huge mistake. That's incorrect. The mind training is first starting to acknowledge, wait a minute, I'm not what I think I am. And that takes a time. Even if we get it immediately, because I feel like I did grok the course, I got it, but just like Helen Schuckman said, something to the effect of, I know it's true, but I don't believe it. Only the ego uses belief. I really love how with the Course in Miracles, there's no God I have to believe in. There's no believing in anything. There's re-knowing what is so. So we've talked ourselves into something. You could put it like that. And we've just put layers and layers and layers of stories on top of stories. And it's all ego propaganda. None of it is true. It all says you're separate from God and you did a great thing, but it was a terrible thing because now God's mad at you, but you killed God, but God is going to come back from the grave and you better run because you're bad, but you're not bad because you did this amazing thing. You separated from God. You are great, but not great enough that God's not going to have vengeance on you and condemn you to hell for the rest of your days. There's no escape from that, no forgiveness. It's just a hamster wheel of madness. Okay, so all of this to say that transfer of training, I started looking up the word training in A Course in Miracles, and then I looked up the word transfer. References, they're so inspiring. Where I ended up was the epilogue to the workbook. Last week, I referenced the introduction to the workbook because the introduction talked about transfer of training. It said, transfer of training in true perception, which is what the Holy Spirit offers us, does not proceed as does transfer of the training of the world, which might be more of a barter or an exchange. But when the Holy Spirit teaches us true perception, to have, give all to all. That's what the Course teaches us, to have, give all to all. So there's no bartering or exchanging, or there's no winners and losers. Everybody's a winner. The purpose of the workbook is to train your mind in a systematic way to a different perception of everyone and everything in the world. The exercises are planned to help you generalize the lessons so that you will understand that each of them is equally applicable to everyone and everything you see. I like how Ken Wapnick boiled down the workbook to 2 lessons. He said you could do lesson 5, I am never upset for the reason I think, to catch yourself when you're triggered and reactive, and remind yourself, I'm truly upset for a deeper reason. I believe I've separated from God and that I'm on my own here on the run. And lesson 34, I could see peace instead of this. And that is the choice, the power of decision to move away from the ego to the Holy Spirit. So if we just practiced, I'm never upset for the reason I think, step 1 of the forgiveness practice is acknowledging that what's going on here, I need to be accountable for, that I am the author of my own feelings. Nobody else can make me feel anything. And then I could see peace instead of this, to open to guidance coming through us. We don't figure out what peaceful would be. We don't say, if only that person was no longer in my life, I'd be peaceful. We just open ourselves to guidance. And I also read you last time in the introduction to the workbook, it says the workbook is divided into 2 main sections: the dealing with the undoing of the way you see now. That's lesson 5. I'm never upset for the reason I think. And the second part of the workbook is concerned with the acquisition of true perception. So the Holy Spirit takes hold of ego perception, which is meant to distort our interpretation of everything, and offers us perception which is in the reflection of God's love. So it's purifying fearful perception, and it's tuning us into loving perception. So then I went to the epilogue, of the workbook. And it says, this course is a beginning, not an end. Your friend, the Holy Spirit, goes with you. You are not alone. No one who calls on the Holy Spirit can call in vain. And that's what we do at the beginning of every class. Every time we meet, we call on the Holy Spirit to make sure none of us is in charge. We're here to open and receive. Whatever troubles you, be certain that the Holy Spirit has the answer and will gladly give it to you if you simply turn to the Holy Spirit and ask it of the Holy Spirit. He will not withhold all answers that you need for anything that seems to trouble you. The Holy Spirit knows the way to solve all problems, resolve all doubts. The Holy Spirit's certainty is yours. You need but ask this certainty of the Holy Spirit, and it will be given you. That's what we're asking for, the certainty that all our problems are solved, because what the Holy Spirit reveals to us is there is no problem. We're dreaming. So the Holy Spirit is not actually, passing out get out of jail free cards or telling us what to say to somebody else or, whether we should take a job or how to win the lottery. None of that. Although on the lower rungs of the ladder, it seems like we are receiving personal messages. And so in this group, we keep reminding ourselves that we're actually reaching up, so to speak, so that we're tuning in to higher vibrations and messages, which are making it clearer and clearer to us that we are a mind, a joined mind, and that reality is not what we have been thinking it is. Yes, we are going to work out a bunch of kinks, and we are going to develop certainty within the dream as we recognize more and more that we are the collective dreamer of this dream. And it's important not to let the ego take over and start to pat itself on the back that it's doing spirituality really well. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not harmful, but it interrupts awakening to the truth of what we are. So I wouldn't want you to get hung up on it if you're feeling good about your spiritual practice. Enjoy your spiritual practice. And, just allow that it's not the person who awakens. It's the mind that comes to, like snaps out of being unconscious. We're okay. My husband's going to come get me if it's anything. He's thoroughly enjoying this, by the way. See, one reason I was attracted to him is that in certain situations that scare me, he's thrilled. So that's very that's exciting for me, to be with somebody who's not scared of certain things. And I'm not scared of things that he's afraid of. So it's a really interesting, that's true for all of us. It's interesting to find out, look, I'm walking into this situation. For me, it's not fraught with anxiety at all. But in another situation, I'm tense and shaky. And it's just so interesting to observe that and see that it's unnecessary. Like being afraid of this storm doesn't really make us more equipped to deal with the storm. Just like feeling guilty about something doesn't really provide you with a good conscience. Guilt really, past a certain point, is very self-indulgent. It just makes everybody miserable. Yeah, the only thing that guilt is good for is to notice if I regret the way I've interacted with somebody, and maybe I'd like to make amends, or maybe I'd like to make amends to myself because I, feel like somebody walked all over me or took advantage or whatever it is. But guilt should just be like a signal to pick up on and make an adjustment, and to make the adjustment with the Holy Spirit. So I read you that part of the epilogue as reassurance, and it's loving, and also to say that the Course really means it when it says you've got to enter into relationship with Jesus. Me, Jesus says, I'm the author of this book. Work with me, talk to me, be with me, be in relationship with me. I am with you. And if Jesus doesn't work for you, Holy Spirit. And, if it's something else, like you have some other path, and Buddha or Krishna or Shiva or dream time, or I don't know, there's so many beautiful, beautiful spiritual paths at their essence. God, the word God, whatever. You may actually, a name may arise within you that becomes the spiritual master that you commune with. It's about going from what we consider communication, which is very limited, and to language and body language and verbal language, going from that to more intuitive communication, where you notice that you're saying things before somebody else says it, you're finishing sentences, or watching TV, you know what's coming next, or you're very attuned to your pet. Moving from what I think of as communication to communion. Communion is this absorbing, when I ask you, are you spongeable? Can you settle into your breath and let go of identity and be a balloon and be breathed and be a sponge and absorb that which is present and goes unnoticed? And even though things don't happen simultaneously, um, as far as I understand, they almost seem simultaneous. For instance, I've mentioned to you that I grieved for my cat, and I could feel, any of you who have ever grieved, there's like, it's physically painful, through the heart, and, and then tears will come out the eyes, or depending on how you grieve, you may be more emotionally constipated and not be able to cry, which doesn't feel good either. Yet when I was going through that, when I would turn to spirit, I could feel this center in the heart area. It felt circular, and there was no trouble there. There was no disturbance. I finally came to call it an ongoing sense of well-being. That's what it feels like to me. It's anticlimactic in the nicest way. Because when I tune in, it's always there. What is always there? What is there in the heart center? It's a very pleasant feeling, and it's uplifting, so that it actually goes beyond the body. If you pay attention, when you're having emotions, you may find that they actually are within the body and outside the body, because you're vibrating with different frequencies. Or Kristen Kirk, a wonderful spiritual teacher, talks about octaves. And Ken always says how symphonic and musical the Course is. And music takes you beyond language. You could ride music like you ride waves in the ocean, so that you're not just experiencing yourself as your body, that there's a joining beyond your skin. You can try it right now, just breathing and just noticing in your heart center. That's usually where this sort of opening occurs. As you breathe life through your heart, and your heart center, your fourth chakra, that goes all the way through your shoulders and upper back and down your arms and out your fingers. There's more than meets the eye. There's more to your sensational field than what stops at the flesh. And that's another way of building trust in your teacher, in the Holy Spirit, is allowing yourself to expand beyond the body and allowing yourself to feel good. No matter what the circumstances, in the middle of anything, you can tap into that. And it's an openness. It's spacious. You know, a Buddhist path might call it emptiness, but there's many different kinds of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is much more physicalized from what I've studied. And I love that. They have all kinds of practices. Any questions? Any experience that you're trying to discern for yourself, whether you're communing with your inner teacher? Yes, Taylor.
So it's wild that you're touching on some awareness that I've had this week. Not to bring in other sources or anything, but it's just all kind of congealing into one central awareness. I've been listening to a scientist. Her name's Annika Harris. She wrote a book called Consciousness. The information that she's presenting from research is just really blowing my mind and causing some serious cognitive dissonance. So I can't even translate it properly. You know, I'm not a neuroscientist, but from layman's terms, basically they've proven through various types of diagnostics and imaging that we don't have the will and decision making that we believe we do. They've followed blood flow that clearly indicates in the brain the decision is made before the stimulus even is presented. And so it immediately snatched previous conversations that you and I have had about the script. And it's already over, and we're looking back on this thing in terms of the course, but it aligned in a scientific way right with what I've known from studying the course for the past, I guess, three years now. And so I just have been in this place of like, what the hell? What? So, you know, and I'm waffling back and forth between this feeling of almost traumatic, you know, like I just don't really have any grasp of what's going on? Am I just some pawn observer here playing out a role in this character of Taylor with all this nonsense? Or is there an even deeper meaning behind my role as this observer, an unwilling participant? And the course teaches that also. There is no will but God's will. So it's like all these lessons are getting flung at me with this scientific data. And I'm just, wow. She even talked about how you touched on it a moment ago, beyond the body, like we process everything as this integrated experience, but you can look at the frequency and speed of sound waves versus light waves versus sensory input to the nervous system and the processing that has to relay through the brain. And they're all at different speeds. So that alone shows you that you're not feeling when you hit a tennis racket to a tennis ball, you're not feeling it in your hand. You're not feeling that pressure and impact at the same time you're seeing the ball hit the racket, or the same time that you're hearing it go ping. But yet we're experiencing it as this integrated thing. So I don't even really know that I have a point. I'm just, again, blown away because I've been processing this for a week, and then here you are coming through the course and we're talking about it from, the spiritual lens. So that's what's happening. I'm not going to show camera because I'm just like, I look like I feel and sound right now. I'm just a show. I'm having a day. It's wild. I didn't plan on really saying anything because I don't know that anything I say or do or think or feel or anything matters anymore. But just wondering if you could speak to that, please, or if anyone else is having similar.
Well, the last thing you just said, you don't know if it matters. Everything matters if we're a vessel for love. So that's what gives meaning to life when everything else starts getting stripped away as one way or another, we get evidence reflected back to us that we're not what we've taken ourselves to be. And I thoroughly enjoyed what you were, immersed in and having your mind blown from. And everybody is welcome to bring, aspects from your own individual classroom and how it's affecting you here. I'm not like, we can only talk about A Course in Miracles. I'm not saying that. So I just want to say that there's a funny synchronicity, Taylor, where last night I listened to a podcast where a neurosurgeon said that we don't have free will because the body does things. And then if we're asked, why did you turn left? We make up a story to justify why we did something. Because like you were saying, Taylor, there's some way of measuring the brain where it's seen that we don't have the thought first, I am going to turn left. Then we turn left. It doesn't work that way. I don't know how they know because they can't actually read thoughts. Yeah. And then they said other fascinating things that don't really apply to this, but it was, it's that thing where science starts to show us we're all made of molecules, we're all intermingling, and we can read that and know that and yet not believe it. We're not functioning and operating that way. But to have our awareness raised enough that we keep reminding ourselves of that, that is dislodging us from being entrenched in the belief. And that loosening of that grip is everything. Because a momentum builds where we start to, see the optical illusion flip and see it from another perspective from above the battlefield. So that's my reply. Maybe Doreen would like to say something to you.
It's amazing. We're talking about this subject of how the body seems to lag behind what the mind does. Because I was thinking about that very recently, and I had actually forgotten where I had heard about this very topic years ago. And now you, Taylor, talk about this very thing, and you even give a book where we can read more about that. So that seems to be synchronicity. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to share, the synchronicity. And I would
Yes.
like to share this with more people in other Zoom groups that I'm part of as well.
Mhm. Thank you. I think Bill wants to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to comment the only thing the course says we don't have free will. The script is written. Our free will extends to the choice for either the Holy Spirit or the ego.
Say that again, Bill.
What the course tells us is that the script is written, which means we really don't have any choice as far as that goes. Our free will extends to the choices we make, either for the Holy Spirit or for the ego. And that gets kind of interesting because you have some choices that can have some fairly dramatic implications. And so what I've come to understand, even though it's not specified anywhere, is that the Holy Spirit realizes that there are implications in some cases, and there can be edits, I guess, within the script because of our choices being a choice that may have implications. Most of them typically wouldn't, but the script is written. So, but this is great stuff, Taylor. Thank you, and thank you, Doreen.
I'm so sorry, you guys, but I missed it, Bill.
Oh, what part did you?
I missed the whole thing.
Oh, okay. All I was saying was that the extent of our free will only extends to the decisions we make, either for the Holy Spirit or the ego. It's very interesting at that point because in that decision, there are situations that can have dramatic implications.
Yeah.
And what I've come to understand is that there can be edits to that because of that choice, which actually makes sense. So that's all I wanted to say, and I wanted to thank Taylor and Doreen. But I wanted to ask something else now.
Okay. And I just want to ask you, can you give us an example
An
of these
example of what?
edits?
These edits. One of them that I understood was that in 1986, this is a fairly dramatic one. In Gary Renard's book, he talks about there was the Russians in their system were interpreting missiles coming in, and a high-ranking colonel within their nuclear system was ordered to launch missiles. Evidently, the Holy Spirit helped him in this decision and said, "Don't do this," in some manner. And after, not long after that, their system cleared up and showed that there was no missiles incoming. But there was a point of where implications were fairly large and that things could have gone. Now, that's a dramatic one. As far as you and I on a daily basis, there could be situations that can have dramatic circumstances and could require something. But we can't understand this. There's no understanding. My path is fairly dramatic, and so I've experienced a lot of things, and I can't tell you explicitly, but this was a point that I was thinking about a lot, and I got some answers as I kept searching around. And so the script is written, but our free will extends to those points of decisions. So this is the only thing that we have. I'm not surprised by what Taylor had heard and what other people have. It's just the script is written. It's not like you're going to change it. None of us are really going to change that. But our decisions can influence things. So,
I'll just add to that, that I heard Ken explain once, Ken Wapnick, that every thought we have plays out. So there are so many stories that the Russian guy did the nuclear bomb, and then he learned from that, and then he did not choose the nuclear bomb, and that every thought we have is a story. The script is written both ways. The ego script is complete and finished, and we're always reviewing the past. But when we're in it, it seems like there's a future, but there's not, because we're just reviewing it like watching again. But the whole script is written also, which is that we're dreaming, and that's the last thing we learn, because we wake up and none of it has happened. Nothing happened. So however that lands for you guys, that's pretty wild. And as you say, we can't understand any of it, but thought I'd throw that in.
Okay, the next thing I wanted to ask is on a different vein. Like I said, my path is fairly dramatic. I interact with the Holy Spirit. It's been an incredible journey. I wanted to ask your perspective on this. One of the things that I get has happened to me is sometimes, well, for instance, one thing that happened, sometimes I get parade of failures and problems, and I get overloaded. I feel things, anxiousness, whatever, depressed, whatever. I was asking the Holy Spirit, what kind of meaning does this have for me? And the answer I got was, this will have meaning to you when it is the only meaning to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking, okay, what does that mean to me? And so I understand it's really necessary. What the Course is teaching us is that you can't have both. You can't have one foot in the world and one foot in truth and go along like that. Eventually you have to make a more wholesome choice, a more complete choice. And I understand that, and that's really what it's exemplifying. And the real question I wanted to ask you is that there are times, because of this journey that's fairly dramatic, I have experiences of very deep depression, as well as a very powerful anxiety, where I start hyperventilating. Both of these are non-specific. There is nothing to hold on to. There is nothing there that seems to be anything that I can address. I don't know how to deal with them. And it's interesting because I've gone through so much, and yet this is something that still stands out. What can someone do in those situations when we feel these really powerful emotions that are not necessarily anything we want? They're not of peace, but there's nothing there. There's nothing tangible.
Yeah. There's many things that we can do. There are, many possibilities. One thing that strikes me in you describing this is that it sounds empathic. In other words, it sounds like you're picking up on a big wave of anxiety. And if it's not related to anything in your world, you're not able to connect it. You're either in denial because it's something in the subconscious that's just too difficult to face, or possibly it is worldly. And just quickly, an example of that is, and many, people here, I'm sure, may identify as empaths, where you're feeling more than just what's going on for you. You're picking up other people's feelings. So when I was in Manhattan on 9/11, I was in Midtown Manhattan. I was temping at at a company where I didn't know anybody, but everybody ran down the hall to this corner office, big fancy office, and I went too. And there was only one World Trade Center tower there. So that's like hard to comprehend. And we don't know what's going on. And I stood there and looked for a while. I'm not an overly emotional person. And I'm not one to bust out crying. And then I had to excuse myself and go to the restroom and sob. I just doubled over and sobbed. And I knew that I was feeling something from that event. So I'm suggesting that you're feeling, your capacity to feel is beyond Bill. And that's a lot to take on. And there are methods to deal with that, to work with being a container, to, surrounding yourself with love and light, things like that. There are all different kinds of techniques that you could employ that you might find useful. When I finished the workbook of A Course in Miracles, I received a message to read a book called Unified. And Unified, it said something like a course in spiritual realization. It was also a course, and it was a 6-month course. And in that book, it contained very clear instructions on how to create healthy boundaries when you're empathic in that way. It also works for people who feel possessed by a demon. It's all in our imagination, all of it. Another thing, though, is just human companions. So for me, psychotherapy has been amazing. Having somebody sit there with me so that I can allow the overwhelm of that feeling to shake out, because the body will want to shake it out or curl up in a fetal position or whatever it wants to do. And so I strongly recommend psychotherapy, but finding a good psychotherapist, somebody who's open with spirituality and doesn't think you're crazy and can really hold the space and not be frightened by the intensity of what you're going through, Holy Spirit can really help with that, can really help connect you with somebody.
Well, that's just it. This path is so dramatic for me. I mean, it's continuous all day long, all night long. I spend most of the night in meditation. Like I said, this has been a very dramatic journey. And so it is, everything is spiritual, everything is of the mind. And so worldly solutions, I've had many things that I would typically look to the world for, and I was corrected. There was no point in looking there.
Yeah.
You're on a journey. And so everything here, so even these episodes, they're related, but I guess it's very frustrating for me to not know what to grab onto, what to reference, what to hold. When you have these non-specific, very powerful emotions, you can get lost. It is not a place you want to be, and yet you don't know what to do.
So in that moment, either journaling back and forth in conversation with spirit or speaking out loud to spirit and using the word I, so that you're connecting consciously with the I in order to release the little I. But certainly, Bill, if you wanted to just sit one-on-one and spend, a good amount of time just working through something and see what happens, to me, everything's an experiment. So we do an experiment and we see. We're both coming in love, whoever it is, and not sentimental love, the real stuff.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I appreciate you raising this, because your path is unique to you and powerful and wild, and yet universally everybody has felt anxiety and depression at some point, so it applies. Yeah. Well, we're almost at 1:30. Does anybody else want last licks, or should we end it there? I think we can call it a day. I want you to know the sun came out, but everything is still wild. There's lots of weather, and what a fun experience for me to have you sit with me in the midst of the storm. Thank you. Okay, I'll see you next Wednesday. Mwah.